Most troops in Clash of Clans have their broken moments, but typically it only takes a couple balance changes to level the playing field and they never touch it again. However, there are some that just needed some extra attention. Here are the troops with the most balance changes and why they needed so many.
Let's do this.
Starting with the Bowler with 6 balance changes. When first released, it was underwhelming to say the least. For the housing space that it required, it didn't feel strong enough, especially when mass hogs and Valkyries were shredding at the time. What was the reason to switch to this guy? That's why a couple months later the Bowler would be buffed, making its first attack faster. And while this buff was great and the Bowler did benefit from this greatly, it still wasn't gonna win anyone over anytime soon. That is until 3 weeks later when they cut its housing space from 8 to 6, and by July 2016, it became one of the most broken metas in Clash of Clans history. The Bowler spam meta was insane. They were like Hog Riders during their peak. 3-starring a base was a walk in the park. Due to the explosion in popularity and effectiveness, the Bowler would receive its 3rd balance change in October, reducing its HP. Around that time, the healer was nerfed as well, which played a crucial role in Bowler spam, so they were cracking down on it. So all said and done, by the end of 2016, the Bowler was still considered strong, but not broken. For a while after that, it would remain pretty meta, so much that in June 2018, they would slightly reduce their DPS, so that players would finally use something else. Jeez guys, come on, there's like 20 troops. Fast forward to June 2022, some time had passed and the Bowlers were considered what kids nowadays would call mid. This was due to the scatter shots shredding through the Bowlers, so their popularity in the upper town halls was falling rapidly. So they got buffed, increasing their HP across the board. However, they were still struggling to keep up, and in June 2024, they would receive their 6th balance change, buffing both their HP and damage. Today, the Bowler is pretty decent, especially when you take into account the numerous defense nerfs and equipments that can make them very powerful. But while the Bowlers needed to be fixed up before being decent, the Golem is the complete opposite. It was added, and for 3 years, nothing happened. So why didn't it need 6 balance changes? Well, unfortunately for the Golem, it was caught up in a wave to decrease the effectiveness of ground armies. It had dominated the meta for far too long, and most ground armies start with the Golem. He's the front of the line. It was the foundation. So in January 2016, Golems and Golemites now receive 3 times more damage from the Eagle artillery. And paired with some nerfs for several ground troops at the time, the Golem was not doing so great for about 2 years. I mean, it was still great, I used it, but it certainly wasn't the beast it used to be. In late 2017, they did increase its HP at lower levels, but it wouldn't be until June 2018 where it received a buff that actually made a difference. Having removed the Eagle's ability to deal 3 times more damage to it and several buffs to other ground troops, it allowed the Golem to finally breathe and get back to business. But the true revival of Golems would happen in 2019. In June, they buffed its damage and the def damage radius. And in September, though a small DPS decrease at lower levels where it mattered less, at the upper levels, the Golems dealt more damage, the Golemites got more HP across the board, and from level 8 and onward, it now split into 3 Golemites instead of 2. This was huge for ground attacks, and they've remained a pretty solid option ever since. It wouldn't be until June 2024 where their HP was slightly increased as part of an effort to buff offense across the entire game. But perhaps the Golem wouldn't have needed so many balances if it wasn't so intertwined with the Witch throughout her 8 balance changes. Added in 2013, boy was she OP. I don't want to dive into the history of how OP the Witch was, I had an entire series about that, but let's just say that the Witches were basically John Cena. All the defenses saw were skeletons after skeletons. Imagine you're a cannon for a second. Only a month later, they decreased the Witch's range from 5 to 3 tiles. Now, because the Witch had to be so close to defenses, it made her susceptible to splash damage and really any kind of damage. However, this didn't really matter because just put a Golem in front of it and bam, you got yourself one of the most unstoppable strategies ever. Go Wee Wee. They even added a new level without any nerfs, which was absolutely nuts. But in March 2016, they finally tackled the main reason she was OP in the first place, the skeletons. They decreased their HP, and they made it so that they no longer trigger traps, which was crucial for Go Wee Wee armies. All of a sudden, you'd see clips like this. Yeah, they basically killed the witch. Later that year, they almost tripled their HP, allowing them to not die to literally everything. But that wasn't enough because just a couple months later, they nearly doubled her damage and gave them more HP. And in March 2017, they increased her skeleton spawn rate from 6 to 5.6 seconds. All of this was in a time when air attacks were way ahead of the game. So it made sense that developers were trying to buff ground armies and perhaps bring back the witch. And these buffs were certainly helping. But it wouldn't be until June 2018 where Go Wee Wee made a return as Witch Slap. It's basically Go Wee Wee, but with newer troops in the clan castle like Yetis or boulders. I still call it Go Wee Wee. Same thing. Their comeback was due to their damage being doubled and receiving more HP with only a slight decrease in skeleton production. The witch was a beast. A couple months later, they would nerf the level 1 and 2 witch, as she was a little crazy at Town Hall 9 and 10, and for the next 6 years, she would remain the same, prevailing in many strategies, even being buffed in 2024 to make her a bit more viable at upper town halls. And while the witch may have had a great comeback story, the same can be said about the giant, which has been fighting for relevance for over a decade through its 8 balance changes. The giant has been in the game since launch, and at first it was awesome. It was the only tank in the game. I mean, did you really have a choice? The problems only began with the level 6 giant, which was added around the time the Golem came out. Naturally, the Golem stole the spotlight as the tank. Unfortunately for the giant, its brand new level 6 was dog water compared to the very beefy Golem. Throughout 2013, the giant received 3 buffs, increasing their hit points and damage all 3 of those times, back to back. It just wasn't good enough against powerful defenses like the brand new Inferno Tower. It was getting melted. But yeah, that was it. Other than that specific level in 2013, the Giants would receive no balance changes until 4 years later in December 2017, when they buffed their HP of some of the upper levels. Subsequently, in that update, they nerfed the Inferno Tower, allowing troops to be healed even if targeted by it. It was pretty clear that they were trying to reintroduce the Giants into the meta. However, that would never work. There were much popular and effective options. Unless you were Town Hall 10 or under, the Giant was often seen as just a cheap shield that you maybe bring 1 or 2 of. And that basically explains the rest of the Giants' history of balance changes. I wish it was more interesting than that. In June 2018, they buffed their HP, as well as in 2019, and again in 2021. And in June 2022, they would receive their final buff up to this point, increasing their damage at upper levels where it needed it the most. But outside of very specific uses, the Giant's relevance is still in question, and I wouldn't be surprised if the next balance change is yet another buff. A troop in a similar trend is the Dragon with 9 balance changes, and every single one of them is a buff, which may not make a whole lot of sense at first. I mean, the Dragon was the most powerful troop when the game came out. It was the leaderboard go-to army, so what's with all the buffs, bro? Well, the Dragons were simply nerfed through defense changes. They added more air defenses, made some defenses stronger, they added a whole bunch of air traps. You get the gist of it. In March 2013, they enabled it to do splash damage, which was great, but even at max level, it was struggling against all that firepower at Town Hall 10, especially with the recent addition of the multi-target mode for the Inferno. So they would end up buffing its HP and damage. For a while after, they were pretty decent, and mass dragons continued to be used widely. They were the Electro Dragon of their day, 2 stars left and right. But by the end of 2016, the dragon would go through a series of changes, increase attack speed in December, and increase damage and hit points to the higher levels during the summer of 2017. This was the first significant buff to the dragons, and it was to help them become a viable option at Town Hall 10 and 11, which was dominated by Lava Loon at the time. However, their relevance continued to decline at later town halls as much powerful armies emerged. Over the next 3 years, their hit points were increased in 3 separate occasions at the levels they needed the most, and it seemed to have done the trick. Dragons have been very powerful in recent years, especially after the equipment update. Some would even say, nowadays, it's a S-tier troop. But there's one troop that you won't be surprised to hear about, the Hog Rider with 11 balance changes. Right out the gate, to put it simple, the Hog Rider was straight doo-doo. For 6 housing space, it targeted anything, and it was an all-around disappointing troop. A few months after release, they dropped the housing space from 6 to 5. However, the August 2013 buff would prove to be one of the most impactful in the game's history. Now preferring defenses and dealing more damage, the Hog Riders were now capable of wiping any base with very little skill. Just lure the clan castle well and keep the hogs alive with heal spells. It was that simple. This would lead to 2 HP nerfs that year, but the hogs went absolutely nowhere. You needed to time the heals a little better, but it wasn't that big of a deal. The nerf was like nothing. However, in July 2014, Supercell had a big brain moment. What about, instead of nerfing the hog over and over again, let's just buff the giant bomb to do extra damage to it. And just like that, 2 giant bombs would spell doom for the hogs. Anti-Hog Rider bases with these double giant bombs became very popular, and from 2014 to 2016, it was a terrible time to be a Hog Rider. During this time, they experienced a major decline in popularity. Fortunately for the hogs, they removed this giant bomb multiplier in late 2016, as by then, defense was stronger than it was in 2014. A lot stronger actually, which is why their HP was buffed twice in 2017. The only time the Hog Rider was nerfed in modern times was the level 9 in 2019, as the Sui mass hog strategy was insanely powerful at Town Hall 12. But this nerf wasn't that impactful, they were still very popular. Ever since those 2017 buffs, the hogs have remained a pretty solid option in a wide range of armies. They have only gotten better with HP and damage buffs at certain levels, and with equipment like the Life Gem, it's safe to say the hog is here to stay. But at least the Hog Rider has always been loved by many, while the Valkyrie, once labeled one of the worst troops in the game, was a laughingstock between her 12 balance changes. When released in 2013, they were not so great. Their swinging attack left a lot to be desired as they targeted one thing at a time. And even after a buff to her damage, by the end of 2013, she was only good at one thing: defending your base in a clan castle. After an unsuccessful buff in January 2014, the Valkyrie would get reworked that summer, allowing her to target in between buildings, making full use of her area splash damage. Things were getting better. However, though she was finally considered good in some attacks, she still wasn't used all that much, which led to another rework in March 2016, increasing her damage and initial attack speed whilst reducing her HP. It's as if overnight the Valkyrie went from being a joke to a reincarnation of the 2014 Hog Rider. She was absolutely busted, and man, you just had to be there, but like I said, it was kind of like the Hog Riders in 2014. Shredding everything in its way. Their HP was slightly reduced a couple days later, but yeah, the Valkyrie kept slicing her way through 3 stars year after year. The only reason Valkyries went out of style as time passed was because of defenses like the scatter shot in the later town halls. So she was known to be decent, but only up to a certain town hall. They tried to buff the Valkyrie, increasing her HP 5 times over the next few years. That one might be a record. I don't know. Maybe the Giant beat that one. But there were just better options available, and by early 2023, the Valkyrie hadn't got a new level in 2 years. But that would all change in June 2023. They added the level 10 Valkyrie, which made her at least usable, and in December 2023, level 11. The Valkyrie was now significantly stronger than ever, and pair that with the new Root Riders at the time and different equipment available, it was game over for your base, not the Valkyrie. This led to an HP nerf in September 2024, but the Valkyrie is still very good, and it only took 12 balance changes. But nothing beats the healer, the troop with the most balance changes at 13. Technically, but don't fight me, it's not a contest. A major part of the reason the healer has so much is that she's a support troop, which lands her in a lot of unique situations like how much she heals, what she heals, and when. She has a lot of these changes, way more than 13, but I chose to count the changes that actually made a difference, and I know not everyone will agree that all of these are nerfs or buffs, but it's important to know that this is how they balance the healer. This is what makes her good or bad. So at first, not much happened. They improved her AI almost immediately, but it was pretty clear that something else was wrong with the healer, as it was practically never used. So in May 2013, the largest housing space decrease took place with the healer. This allowed her to be a bit more present in the meta. However, she still wasn't all that popular, as her behavior was known to be a hit or miss, choosing to follow certain troops at the worst time possible and never healing what players actually wanted it to heal. This is because the healer at the time would go heal the first thing she saw, and it would only change targets once its initial target was healed. Her AI was not that smart. Regardless, they instead buffed her HP and healing power, and players just accepted that her clumsy AI was part of using the healer. But finally, in September 2014, she was reworked and now stuck to a group of troops instead of whatever she was doing before. Not long after, she was buffed again, allowing her to sneak past air traps and not activate them, playing a crucial role in the rise of Queen Walk and other goofy strategies like Super Queen. Because of this shift in utility, she would be nerfed later that year, reducing her effectiveness the more healers there were. However, this update also unintentionally buffed the healers. During this time, they healed heroes 20% more than before, and this wouldn't be fixed until 4 months later, when it was revealed that that wasn't supposed to happen. In late 2016, they reversed the trap activation buff, as they were simply out of control. But despite these changes, the healers never went out of style. She remained the backbone of a lot of strategies. In 2019, her healing radius was reduced, as well as her healing power, and in a hilarious turn of events, the healer in 2021 was somewhat broken, as she would constantly lock onto a unicorn, and this went on for several months until they went back to adjust her AI. Around this time, players also felt that the healer could use some love at lower town halls, especially how most of the nerfs throughout the years had impacted these lower town halls as well. So not only her HP was increased, but also the healing power. The healer would go through more AI changes after this, but nothing major. As usual, the healer is in a great spot, and always has been, at least after 2014. But yeah, those are the troops with the most balance changes in Clash of Clans. In case anyone is wondering, there are no builder base, super troops, or clan capital troops that have more than 6. The only thing that came close was the Power P.E.K.K.A, and even that one had like 4, I think. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed, and hey, YouTube thinks you'll like this next video, so why don't you check it out? As always, happy gaming outs. Peace!